are you doing playing that boring kids game? Don't you want to play something violent? You want to play something that'll make you seem creepy and strange. How about something that'll really piss off your parents? Well then you better check out Super Columbine Massacre RPG. Play as Eric Harris and Dylan Klebold, the infamous mass murderers themselves. Enjoy the stunning graphics as you gun down students and teachers. Writhe in the existential horror that is suburban America. Download your free copy today. Like it or not, Super Columbine Massacre RPG exists. Created by Danny Ladona using RPG Maker 2000 and released for free download on the 6th anniversary of the Columbine shootings on April the 20th, 2005. Soon after the launch of the game, it came under the radar of media outlets, and the game caused quite the uproar among religious organizations, government officials, and anti-video game activists, along with any reporter looking for an easy story. But actually the opposite was also true. The game was met with a fair amount of praise and defense. Some even applauded it on how it opened up the medium of video games beyond just fantasy and into real-world issues. Some have even called it the most important in gaming history. And that's just what's on the official website. Ladone posted an artist statement on Super Columbine's site confessing the reason why he made the game. He claims that he wanted it to be a step forward into an age of socially aware gaming. He thought the industry was focused too much on escapism and fantasy, and wanted to make a statement with the RPG, but mostly, he wanted to try to use the medium of gaming to get people to take a fresh look at a controversial subject. The artist statement also says that the game's success comes not from its technical accomplishments or engaging gameplay, but rather the provocative polarization it elicits from its audience. In case you are wondering, the reason why provocative polarization isn't bold is because he wants the words that make him sound smart to stand out. When he says engaging gameplay, I really hope he's referring to video games in general, because I've seen better game design on the back of cereal boxes. No, I gotta tell you, this is way better than Super Columbine Massacre RPG. It's just a comic. For the full retro experience, I have a USB SNES controller. When the game starts up, we're treated to a low-quality rendering of Marilyn Manson's The Nobodies, a song he wrote about the two shooters. If you will indulge me for a second, the whole idea behind his stage name, taking the first name of a well-known attractive starlet, Marilyn Monroe, and combining it with a well-known psychotic killer, Charles Manson, it's a statement against how the media glorifies killing and murderers. He wrote an article about people blaming him for his supposed hand in the Columbine killings, where he denounced the media outlets who turned the killers into celebrities. How does he combat this? By solidifying the murderers forever in song, hailing them as misunderstood outcasts who just wanted to be loved. Okay, I'm sorry for that detour, but seriously, that bullshit really sets the stage for the rest of the game. The game begins Pokemon style with your mom yelling at you. You start off by playing shooter Eric Harris, waking up bright and early, ready to start the day. In his room you can find a copy of Doom for the PC and a box of antidepressants. A large amount of the dialogue in this game was lifted from real life, out of the two's videos, journals, recordings of the shootings, or secondhand reports. Ladone mixes the already off-kilter quotes the two mentally unstable boys really haphazardly into some of the most confusing dialogue I've ever had the misfortune to read. In the basement, you grab the bombs they made to blow up the school and a Marilyn Manson CD. Now get this, the Manson and Doom CDs are equipable items that increase your stats. Now, I have to admit, this joke is actually pretty funny. So you meet up with the other shooter and you can trigger a few other cutscenes while you're down here. You can watch a flashback where they talk about buying guns, get pumped up by watching Apocalypse Now, and make one of their infamous basement tapes. Okay, now I'll admit there are some times where the game can actually read pretty decently. Such as while they were driving to school, the use of the Shakespeare quote actually is pretty okay. But how the hell does reading the entirety of a KMFDM song deepen my understanding of the story or its characters? Now here's one of the shittiest looking levels I've ever seen. All Ladone had to do was draw a 16-bit car into a palette swap. But he couldn't even be bothered to do that. I guess low-resing a few Google searches would have to do to populate this parking lot. The perspective of this whole map is thrown off because of it and just becomes painful to look at. Planting the bombs in the school is one of the only parts of this game that feels like an actual game. It's difficult to maneuver through the hallways without being caught by security cameras or the people in the hall. So here we are, the reason behind all the controversy. All the students have been reduced to high school stereotypes, stripped of their names or any sort of individuality. You're not so much killing the virtual versions of the actual victims, but instead you're shooting jock guy, preppy girl, nerdy girl, janitor, and so on. This simple game mechanic actually mirrors the way the two murderers might have actually perceived their peers and victims. If you are sickened by this, good. You should be. And that means that the game was actually doing its job. Super Columbine was never meant for you to enjoy killing innocent people who don't fight back. This was something that a lot of people had a hard time wrapping their heads around, the idea of a game that's not meant to be played for fun. The same way a violent movie or book could be anti-violence, Super Columbine is anti-violence. I think I owe this game at least an ounce of credit, and that's for the feeling of guilt that you get from killing all the students. If you walk away from this game with anything, it's that. Even if the violence in this game is so absurd it borders on comical, you're still not killing soldiers, or monsters, or evil masterminds. You're killing people. Students, teachers, just regular people. And that's enough to make you sick. As you walk around the school, you can trigger different cutscenes, like the one where Dylan talks about being an outsider in the lunchroom. Then the game will actually just make you read all of T.S. Eliot's The Hollow Men. Okay, I can see how some of this relates to the shooters, but you do not have to use the whole damn poem. If I wanted to read T.S. Eliot, I would have just gone to the library. I wonder what the different shapes are in Count Chocula. Well, the bulk of this is made up of Pac-Man ghosts. Okay, here's a bat. That makes sense. Is this an amoeba? Oh wait, I think it's some kind of bedsheet ghost. Okay, it marginally looks like a lightning bolt, but I think that's giving it too much credit. Are these different sized steaks? Because they look like two fucking uncooked steaks. When you finally get tired of killing students, you can go to the library where you can get into a shootout with the cops before killing yourself. Sometimes the use of real images in the game can actually be pretty effective, if it's by adding little reminders that the events really did take place, for style, or this montage of photos taken of the victims grieving over their murdered classmates. It only drives home the guilt of the simulated tragedy you just participated in. So is the game evil? Well, I'm not going to say yes, I'm not going to say no. It's in bad taste, of course, but it wasn't meant to be completely offensive. The game was made to give a deeper understanding of the events, and to spark conversation, which is what we're doing right now, so in that aspect it did succeed. But I'm not really sure the game deserves all this attention. It's poorly executed, written, and it feels like it's trying way too hard. The remorseful feeling that you get from playing the game is tangible, but I've gotten that experience from plenty of other games I've played. So it's not all bad, just mostly bad. That is until you get to the next section of the game. That's right, it's not over yet. After offing yourself, you wake up as Dylan in, you guessed it, hell. From here on in, you must fight your way through the bowels of a 16-bit Hades populated with Doom sprites. And seriously, this is half the damn game. The tone has radically shifted. What was first a serious look at the events peppered with dark humor is now a tongue-in-cheek romp through Fantasyland. And serves no other purpose than to undermine everything positive the first half of the game built up. Also, this section is ridiculously hard. You start out alone, your attacks do very little, and every other battle is a horde of enemies which you stand no chance of surviving whatsoever. So many times you'll be running around and get cornered by half a dozen imps. You have to find Eric and grab the better weapon before you even stand a chance. But sometimes, after you get both, you still might be too beat up to keep going because you lose all your health packs from the first half, and getting another one is so damn rare. At this point, you realize that the reason you're having so much trouble is that your level is too low. So everything you just learned about empathy and compassion has been thrown in your fucking face when you realize the best way to get past this section is to kill every damn student in the whole school. So as it turns out, the game wasn't actually teaching you anything. This hell world is a joke. After you fight your way through damnation, you battle a South Park Satan to gain free reign over hell. And then the final cutscene is a press conference where the type of people who spoke up in the wake of the massacre are parodied. This scene comes off as completely masturbatory, as the only purpose it serves is to draw attention to how much more informed this game is than those who immediately commented on the tragedy. The word pretentious gets thrown around a lot, but this game really deserves it. It thinks it's giving us a much more informed perspective on the events, but the writing and everything else in the whole game is so weak it can't help but collapse under its own weight. Everything in the game falls short of provocative, or is just plain counterproductive to itself. The game is flawed, the scenes are unfocused, and the artist statement is so conceited it really just feels like it's there to cover the creator's ass. But guess what? The story of Super Columbine does not stop here. The game also spawned a copycat. VTech Rampage was created by Ryan Lambourne and was hosted on Newgrounds.com. Based on the Virginia Tech shootings, the game was supposed to be a joke that no one really found funny. Super Columbine was also up for an award as well. It was a finalist for the Slam Dance Guerrilla Game Makers competition for 2007, but the game was taken off the list due to its controversial material. As a result, 7 of the remaining 13 games pulled out in protest, including such games as Braid and Castle Crashers. Ladone then created the feature-length documentary Playing Columbine, which he himself directed, produced, and edited. And in case you were wondering, yes, it shows.
This was a philosopher. This was somebody who wasn't just out to make people feel bad.
Yeah, that it would probably be an intelligent game.
He didn't want the attention. He didn't even want people to know who he was.
The documentary is one part discussion on violence in video games and another part video games' role in the world of art. And in these aspects, it's actually pretty good. The documentary is played out in an engaging point-counterpoint formula that unsurprisingly leads towards the side of video gaming. But there's a third part of the documentary, and that's the justification for the creation of Super Columbine. It seems to groom the RPG into some sort of video game messiah, hailing it as almost single-handedly the ancestor of all art games to come. Now, to quote the documentary completely out of context.
Just because something happens before something else doesn't mean that it happens because of something else.
Now, it is interesting to note that the discussion around a piece of art becomes part of the work itself, coming all the way back to that provocative polarization. However, I feel that most of the discussion around the game stems from the core idea of Super Columbine, the fact that it is a game about the Columbine Massacre. The opposition took one look at the title and declared it evil. The support saw that it wasn't exploitative and declared it art, and neither side really wants to look directly at its contents, either because they don't want to be sickened by it, or because they might have to admit that the game has very little to say other than, so, how about that school shooting business?
Certainly I learned more about the Columbine Massacre in the 1 hour I spent watching somebody play this game than I had learned in all of the mainstream media articles, including the movie Bowling for Columbine, a documentary.
Am I really learning anything from this game? A quick jaunt through Wikipedia is vastly more educational than playing Super Columbine, and there was a lot of subjects that weren't even touched on in the game. Several psychologists have gone through the shooter's videos and journal entries to get a closer look at the source of their motivations. For one thing, it wasn't all about bullying and being loners. Both shooters were bullies themselves, to the point where one student was in tears and afraid to come to school. They both apparently also had a decent social life. Psychological profiles have been formed around the shooters, labeling Dylan as a manic depressive, a hothead, and suicidal. Eric is believed to have suffered from what is now known as antisocial personality disorder, which is what a lot of serial killers suffer from. He has also had a massive superiority complex and lied for the sheer pleasure of it. One theory is that if Eric never died at Columbine, he may have gone on to do something even worse. Does that come out at all of this game? No, the game falls into the same trappings of the media that blame the killers for everything other than themselves. The game blames them on being bullied, being loners, even when all those things are false. It's not like this is new information. This article was written in 2004. So the shooters weren't constantly bullied, weren't social outcasts, and Depeche Mode wrote Stripped, not Rammstein. Ladone isn't raising any new questions with the shooters. The questions the game asks are steeped in inaccurate concepts and information about the events. Actually, the question I have now is how much of this game is about Eric and Dylan, and how much of it is about Ladone?
To be honest with you, I was headed down something of a similar path, I think, as the two killers.
On his blog arthousegames.com, Jason Rohrer, who created such games as Passage, he wrote a critique on Super Columbine, coming to the same conclusion I did, that the message of the game is ruined by the mechanics of the hell level, and therefore cannot be art. But he later goes on to explore the idea that maybe the game is not a teaching tool, but is in fact a fantasy set from the perspective of the shooters or the mass media. And at Rohrer's eyes, this makes the game art. To me, it seems like the game never really knew what it was supposed to be. It feels like there's a lot of incomplete themes, and Rohrer took one of these almost concepts and extrapolated it. GameSutra.com published an article titled Why You Owe the Columbine RPG. Within, the author basically makes the argument that the game is important because it is offensive. Super Columbine got so much attention that it brought the idea of art games to a lot of non-gamers. The article actually brings up the content of the game and even praises the Hell stages, calling it metaphysical critique. Within Hell, you come across various people, all there for a different reason. It slaps you with short monologues on why each character is in Hell, and why the logic that landed them in eternal damnation is ultimately flawed. But why? Super Columbine is supposed to be about the events of the massacre, the shooters, the victims. Where does this metaphysical critique fit into the rest of the game? Really, the game just feels shallow. Even as a satire, it never races beyond being skin deep. A lot of the ideas that it brings up just feel like the game is musing to itself, and not actually giving me something to think about. It's not like Ladone had a lot to bring to the table anyways. Look at the scenes he writes. When he's out of transcript material, he just borrows from even more sources. Shakespeare, KMFDM, Frankenstein, T.S. Eliot, more KMFDM, Apocalypse Now, Nietzsche. He's using someone else's words the whole game. Ladone speaks through the words of other, more creative people because he has nothing interesting to say. Take a look at this scene. At the end of the school sequence, one of the shooters imagines their life together on a tropical island. But what does this add to my understanding of the characters? That mass murderers are better off on a deserted island? It adds nothing. It's completely pointless. Unless he was just trying to suggest a homosexual relationship between the two shooters? Because I'm afraid Elephant beat you to the punch.
I guess this is it. I'm gonna die today. Yeah, I remember even kissing everybody. Do you?
So the question is now, is the game art? To which my response is, sure. Why not? And as shallow and pretentious as Super Columbine may be, the game actually does raise some interesting questions, such as what subjects can and cannot be made into a video game, and is there a way to handle sensitive material, like a school shooting, in a video game? The game also makes for an interesting topic and conversation, but these reasons alone don't legitimize the game as a solid work of art. Because really, I can say the exact same things about VTech Rampage. So if you haven't played it yet, don't. The game really isn't worth your time. Unless you really want to play, guess the 90s alternative rock song playing in the background.